15 years, yeah. I started doing this live jazz. I started doing Jazz Video Guy in 2006. It was actually March 1st, 2006. No, March 29th. Pardon me, I'm a little spaced out here. That I posted my first video. I started as a filmmaker. I went to NYU Film School, and I worked in documentary industrials. Then I became a jazz journalist. And then I did a lot of writing, not much filmmaking, worked in documentaries and industrials, but got into the internet in the 90s. I was a part of the first major jazz website, Jazz Central Station, which was back in 94 that started. And then a lot on the internet. At the end of the decade, I worked for another company called Global Music Network. We did some of the first live webcasts, live streaming. We did the Saxophone Summit from Birdland, Dave Brubeck, in December 1999. Made some money in the dot-com era, and then worked on websites for friends. Sonny Rollins, Joe Lovano, and Billy Taylor. And I started producing their websites. And in 2004, I returned to filmmaking with Billy and Joe and Sonny as clients. I said, let me try some videos with them, because the cost of filmmaking had decreased significantly. Mini DV cams, computer editing, and YouTube arrived. So I started posting on YouTube, and I didn't want to use my name. That was too hard for people to remember. So Jazz Video Guy. Yeah, that was cool. That seemed like a good thing. So it all began, and here it is 15 years later, 2,600 videos, 50 million views. Wow. What a trip, huh? So I'm very happy that it's worked out that way. I'm very happy that I could do something that reaches people and makes people happy. So as fate would have it, March 29th is the 72nd anniversary of the birth of my dear friend Michael Brecker. So let's start off with some Michael Brecker from that 1999 broadcast at Birdland. Only one Michael Brecker. You know, he left us when he was 58, much, much too soon. He was a remarkable musician and a great person. And that was a very memorable gig at Birdland that night. And one of the other musicians who played on that gig was another close friend of mine who ended up being the first video I posted. I'm talking about Dave Liebman. Let's take a look at that first video. Yeah, I'm not going to play the whole video. The quality of the video is, you know, that's before HD. And I was just getting started. I didn't really know how to condense videos to make them look good and whatnot, but that was the beginning. And, you know, a lot of stuff over the years. And what I've been able to do is share my enthusiasm for the music. Now, my favorite trumpeter is Lee Morgan. So I put together a video a few years ago about that showed some of his trumpet solos. Yeah. Wow, Lee Morgan. Still sounds great. You know, one of my first jazz recordings that I purchased was the Sidewinder when I was 12 years old, something like that. Music still blows my mind. Fantastic. And I've been very lucky in my life. When I moved to New York to go to NYU Film School, I used to hang out at the Vanguard, got to know a lot of musicians. And very interesting to get to know the musicians whose music has moved me. And those relationships continue. I've got a couple of interviews on tape here. I just put this whole thing together in the past couple of days, so no one could appear live. But here's an interview I did yesterday with the wonderful saxophonist Gary Bartz. Did you go to New York to study at Juilliard?
I did, yeah. I went to study because I didn't understand what I was playing. I knew everything that I was playing was correct, but you know, when people would say call out chords, then I didn't know what that was. So I went to New York to learn that.
How would you compare jazz education or music education at Juilliard to your experience with music education today?
Well, when I started school in Juilliard, it was strictly European classical curriculum, and they had no so-called jazz or anything like that. So I you know, playing the saxophone, they didn't have saxophone major. Joe Allard was the saxophone teacher, but it wasn't a major. So I took as my major composition. I was a composition major and minor in woodwinds. And so I studied with Joe Allard there. But what has happened today, they're trying to force the European classical concept on the jazz department or on the jazz curriculum, which is a totally different way of thinking about music, because the music they want to call jazz, as Duke Ellington says, comes from the African or the Eastern concept where you hear it. You don't need to write it. No one needs to write it. You in the bush, they're playing a drum. They don't have charts. The bands. You never seen Louis Armstrong with the music stands, and you don't do that. You learn the music. Just like I say, you don't want to go to the theater and see the actors reading from the script. I don't want to go to the show and see the music. If I see music in front of music, that means one thing to me. That means two things. It means, number one, they don't know the music. And the second thing is it's a rehearsal, so, and people are paying for it. The only person I've seen to get away with that was Charles Mingus. And it's funny because I just was reacquainted with the Black Saint and the Center Lady. I think isn't that the name of it?
Yeah, Black Saint Center, exactly.
When I started back in I think it was 1963, where Mingus had this big band every Monday night at the Village Gate. It was no music. We had no music. It was a big band. That's where I met Eric Dolphy. That's where I met Roland Kirk. He was in the sax section. That Jackie Byard was playing piano. I don't remember. I think Richard Williams was the trumpeter. But it was a big band, and he would just ask for musicians, if you want to come down and play with, come down. And he called it Charlie Mingus Workshop. People paid to come in. But when I listened to the Black Saint album, I realized we were rehearsing this music. That's what we were doing. We were rehearsing this kind of music, because Mingus would start a riff or start a harmonic pattern or start a rhythm or something, and the rhythm section would take it up, and then he would come over to Eric. Eric was in charge of the sax section, and hum a melody to Eric, and Eric would give it to us, and we'd start playing it, and then he'd do that to all the different sections, and then we'd set it up and we'd be playing, and he might add or subtract things. He'd stop and talk about it. Hey, maybe you do this, and so the audience loved it because they were seeing the process. But when I just saw this documentary where he was saying, well, he didn't have money to pay for a rehearsal studio, So how can he do this? So this is what he came up with, is to get a gig and treat it as a workshop. Yeah. And but it all came together with me when I heard the Black Saint and stuff, because it sounded just like the themes and patterns that we would play, during this period.
Yeah, that was a wonderful recording, full of emotion and passion. I think is an earmark of Mingus's music.
Yeah,
he was a very dramatic fellow.
Yeah, he's very dramatic.
That came through in his music. You were lucky to be part. We mentioned Juilliard, but you're really part of a different sort of jazz education that happened before, and that was you'd get your chops together, you'd join a group like the Jazz Messengers, Mingus, and the older musicians would school you. And experience over a period of time, you would develop your chops. You'd develop as a player, and then you'd go out into the world and lead your own group and so forth.
Yeah.
The system today is totally different. The world is totally different.
Oh, it is,
It's, for my money, I'm not a teacher or a student, but for what I hear and see, that was a better system. I think we got better musicians, more unique improvisers and individualists.
It's the correct system. It's the same way Bach started. It's the same way Mozart. Mozart was composing music when he was 3 years old. He had not been to school. Beethoven was composing music 3, but by the time he was 6, he was out doing concerts. He hadn't learned how to read. He could hear. This music has to be heard, and it has to be heard from the inside, not from the outside. To me, the prime person who could hear who could hear better than anybody for me was Miles Davis. Miles could hear something and hear all of the possibilities. He could, because there are possibilities in every sound. In an automobile crash, there's possibilities of things. So in music, if you're trying to memorize a chord, your brain is busy. It does not have time to listen to what your ears can hear. And so they insist on using this European classical concept to try to teach this African Eastern concept of music. And it has Europeanized this music called jazz. That's why I call it Euro jazz. That's what I'm hearing today. It's either Euro jazz or ego jazz. I hear a lot of that too, because they've gone to school and they've learned how to play all these licks and everything. And so now it's, look at me. It's not about the music. They don't realize it's not about them. It's about the music. Always. Always it has to be about the music. If it ends up being about you, you're in the wrong business.
For sure.
For this, composition, if you're trying to compose solos on the spot, but you're worried about how you look, and that means you're not listening to the other musicians. This other thing, listening is more important than playing. That's why we need listeners. But we have to be able to listen even better than the listeners. So, it's a problem that we face in academia, because they really think that the reading and writing, they don't realize, or at least they haven't accepted it the same way they haven't accepted that there's only one race of humans on earth. They haven't accepted that music has no, first of all, it has no shelf life, but it's I forgot where I was going with that, but
Let me throw in something here about Miles and listening. Herbie tells the story about when he was playing with Miles, he hit what he thought was a wrong chord. Miles heard it and did something with that.
Yes, yes, because it's possibilities. I would hear Miles would say a lot. I heard him say it more than once. I love your mistakes. Because then you have to improvise. That's the only time I improvise is when I make a mistake, because I didn't plan on doing that, you know. So when they are saying we're improvising, to me, that's the negative way of looking at it, because I'm not improvising. I mean, I could give the monkey a saxophone and they could throw it up against a wall. That's an improvisation. Let him play ornithology, though, you know. And there are some monkeys that really, no, don't let me go there.
You know, I once said to Sonny, I said, you know, what's in your head? Because Sonny's improvisations, you know, he's in a class of his own.
He's a composer. He excels at composition. He's one of the people I studied because he uses thematic material. See, theme and variations is what we do. He uses that.
Yeah.
He doesn't just get a bunch of licks and stack them on top of some chord changes he's memorized. He's playing off of the melody. When you play off of the melody, you're going to be melodic and you're going to play all the chords, whether you know them or not. Chet Baker never learned a chord, never ran out of ideas, had a lifetime of ideas playing off the melody.
Well, Sonny's melodic foundations were when he was a kid, he listened to the radio and he went to the movies, and he had all these songs, and all those songs were in his head. And when when he was composing, that's when it came to. So I said to him, just, you know, do you think about it? He said, no. He said, there's nothing in my head at all when I improvise. I said, is music meditation for you? And he said, yes. Music is a form of meditation.
It is a form of meditation, but I think he might he has to have something in his head, or he wouldn't play those notes. He has those notes in his head, or otherwise he's just moving his fingers. So I think he's not explaining that properly. But you know, because as you play, you should be with every note you're playing. That's how deep the meditation is. Every note you play, you have to be right there present with that note. That's the note you chose, you know. So that's why when you stumble, you know, then you gotta improvise and figure it out, you know. But you know how to do it, you know. Yeah. Like I would hear guys say, like I heard Miles say something, and I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he said, Prez played this note on some kind of chord, which was a note that you shouldn't be able to play. He said, and made it work. Because you can play, any note works if you know how to play. If you know how to do this, if you know how to compose music, any note works. You can make any note. I heard this guy. I was doing a workshop with John Baptiste one time, a couple of years ago. And it was over like in Hell's Kitchen. And so there was these kids, and it was all ages. And so they all had gotten the instruments and was playing. So John was teaching them how to play a blues and taught them how to play blues. And so some of them were further along. The guitar player was pretty good. There was a trumpet player was pretty good. And then this kid started playing the saxophone. He had tenor saxophone. And he hit this note, which was horrendous. It was against everything, you know, that the John and the bass player were playing, you know. And he held that note, and he held that note until finally when he got to the end, he made a resolution. And everybody said, yeah, but see, because he could hear it was a wrong note. But not knowing anything about music, he found the right note to make that resolution, to make that wrong note right. That's how powerful that is.
Yeah. Did you practice with Eric Dolphy? Did you guys practice together? What do you practice when you practice with Eric Dolphy?
We practiced duets. We did Bach duets, the hardest duets we could find, because we were talking, and we got to talking about duets. I said, I can't ever find anybody want to do duets. He said, me either. Bing. Well, why don't we do, so I would go down to his loft. But before we could go down, we had to go look for music, because most saxophone music is duets are real easy, So that's when I learned that the oboe is the same range as the saxophone. So we were looking for oboe duets, same low B flat to high F, 2.5 octave. And so we found these Bach clavier, I wish I still had those things, but the Bach well-tempered clavier, the duets. And we would work on this all week by ourselves. And then every Wednesday I'd go down to his loft and we would play them. And so much fun. So much fun.
Was Dolphy, when you arrived in New York City, was Dolphy already fully developed at that point? Because he had such a unique concept.
No, I was in New York before Eric was. I came to New York in '58.
Okay, but when he got to town, was he already Dolphy, or was there a period of developments?
He sounded like Eric to me. Maybe not as strong as he later, became more self-confident, but he sounded like Eric. Yeah, he was, I looked up to him, he was one of the guys. I wanted to be like that. I wanted to, he was a hard worker. He was another virtuoso.
Absolutely. You got to New York in '58. That was still when Miles had the first quintet. A couple years later, Train steps out, leads his own group, eventually joins with Dolphy. Yet there was a lot of opposition to what Coltrane originally was doing. Critics in downbeat called him anti-jazz.
Media. That was media, not to the musicians. Maybe because it wasn't a lot of times the clubs weren't full, but it didn't matter. It didn't matter. The music he was playing, it was like going to church. You go to church, it might not be anybody even in the church. You still benefit from it,
Share with us something about John Coltrane, the man. Of course, we know his music, but those of us who never actually sat down and talked to him.
He was a quiet man, and I was very quiet and shy. I was really shy around John. I was very shy. So we didn't talk much, We didn't talk much. I just listened to him. I'd go around his house and just listen to him practice. And there would be other musicians in there listening, Sometimes some would play, But he was so into his thing, he was working on stuff. And what it showed me is how to work on things, how to get your ideas, how to work on your ideas, because he would work on his ideas, and that night he'd go to work, and he played his ideas. So every night he had new ideas. That's why every time you see him, he had something new. I remember one time when I was working with Art Blakey and the Messengers. We were doing a festival somewhere like in Cleveland or Cincinnati. We were at Ball Stadium, and we played right before he did. And so we came off when they was coming on, So when we passed, he told me, he said, "Oh, you sound good." I said, "Oh my good." I must have floated for like a year or two after that. But so it was me and Hicks. So me and Hicks was hanging there. We went up in the stands to listen. And he was playing something that night that I've never heard again. And we're looking at each other, oh my God, do you hear what he's doing? And people were leaving because they came to see Nancy Wilson and Joe Williams and Count Basie. They didn't understand what they were even listening to. But man, I wish, what would happen is we'd say, well, I'll buy the next record, because I want to hear what he's doing. But he was moving so fast, by the time the next record came out, he had moved on. he moved past many ideas and many phases, so we missed a lot. So if you didn't hear him live, you missed a lot of things.
I like Nat Hentoff's description. John Coltrane was insatiably exploratory.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because what's really the part of his genius was his focus. His focus. He could focus on one idea. Sonny too. Sonny has that focus. He can focus on one idea and play that idea through his whole composition. Play that one idea. Backwards, forwards, upside downwards, do tricks with it, but it's all based on this one idea. I have not mastered that. I get caught up in my ideas and the idea runs into another idea because the way I play, I follow, well, that's what they're doing, but they're following one idea. I follow my ideas. So if my idea leads me somewhere else, I go there. Whereas the idea might lead them somewhere else, but they don't go there. They stay with that first idea. I don't have that kind of focus.
Something what you once said to me, like I think about, you said to me that you wish that you need another lifetime to work on this music.
Oh, you need more than one lifetime. Yeah, you need many, many lifetimes. No one ever learns music. No one has ever or ever will learn music. It's a study, so that's what you do. And turns out music is the first religion. Music, whether people want to admit it, it's the first religion because every group of people, I don't care whether they were cavemen, had ceremonies that they did. And they needed music for that. And music was magical. Most people didn't know how to do it. So whoever knew how to do it was highly regarded. And they became the right hand of whoever the leader was. They were the religious leaders. Yeah. How far we have fallen.
Oh boy. I want to close out here. You played with four people. I called them the four M's. You mentioned two, Miles and Mingus. I want to ask you about the other two. I first heard you on record with McCoy Tyner. I'm trying to think of the name of the recording. Well, Parasina was on there.
Oh, yeah.
They cut your solo out of that.
Hansons, I know they did, yeah.
Never got re-released. I would love to hear what you played on that.
I would too. So I ended up doing it on a record myself. I did it on one of my records because I said, oh, they cut my solo. Yeah.
But you played with McCoy back there at the end of the 60s, and you guys worked together for 50 years. I mean, that's probably your longest association.
Longest tenure. Yeah.
We lost McCoy last year.
Yeah.
Sadly. I once did an interview with Archie Shepp, and Ben Webster had died the day before. He said to me, when someone like Ben Webster leaves, I feel like a part of me has left as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of how I felt when we lost McCoy.
Yeah.
Because of his playing it's been part of my life for so long.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I agree. Last March, the funeral was last March. I went to the funeral. That's the last time I flew. Yeah.
How did playing with McCoy over the years change?
In what way? What do you mean? For me or for him or for...
No, for you, in terms of as you grew as a musician and the experience of you working together over that period of time, there must have been a very powerful musical bond between the two of you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that there always is. That's what happens when you see. That's what's missing today from the music. This and to the detriment of music. There are no bands. There are no bands. Every innovation in this particular music has come through a working band which had been together at least 2 years. At least 2 years. And they got to the point where they knew each other, they could anticipate each other. They knew each other so well, they could anticipate them. They were always ready, they were always listening, they could hear everything they did. That's a band. And the other key ingredient, it has to be young and old. Can't be all old or all young. It's got to be a combination. You have to have the knowledge from the older musicians and the new ideas and the youth and energy of the younger musicians. Have to have that, and that will take music to another spot. But you have to have bands to do it. It's impossible to do it any other way. Impossible. I defy it. If somebody can do it, I will tip my hat. But it hasn't been done yet. I mean, you can go from Ornette Coleman to Charlie Parker to Louis Armstrong to Count Basie to, every innovation in this music has come through a working band, and that band was together at least 2 years. Now, there's a record that was not released that I did with McCoy, which is a prime example of what I'm talking about. Cosmos. They've since released it, but it took them about 10 years. About 10 years later, they didn't release it because this was a working band. That band on that album, you want to hear what we sounded like at Slugs and at Working. That's the album with Freddie Waits, Herbie Lewis, McCoy, and myself. And in addition, we had Hubert Laws and Andrew White, and Alice Coltrane was on some cuts, but the quartet, we were the working band. We had been together for a while, played, we knew this music. So when we came in the studio, Blue Note is used to, you rehearse and you got your songs and you could do an intro and then you play 2 choruses and then you get the drums. They've got a form. We didn't do that because we was a working band. We went in, McCoy started playing, we started playing. And so they didn't know what to do with that. So they sat on it. But you listen to that album. That's that band. That's the sound of the band.
Yeah. Cosmos.
Cosmos, yeah.
Another band you played with, sadly, we lost one of the musicians this year, Stanley Cowell. You guys worked together with Max.
Yeah.
It was an incredible band with Charles Tolliver and Stanley Cowell and Jimmy Merritt and Max Roach.
Yeah.
Some people today, they weren't around to hear Max Roach play the drums.
That's amazing, yeah.
What was the experience of playing with Max? You're taking a solo and Max is behind you.
Well, I had met Max when I was 14, the same year I met Sonny Stitt. My dad started taking me around to the clubs. I wanted to see the different musicians, so I found out, they would do matinees, so Max and his band was working at a club on the avenue, Pennsylvania Avenue, called the Club Casino, and I asked my dad to take me, and he did. And this time, well, let me back up. So I found out Sonny Stitt was doing a matinee one time and asked my dad to take me. And he took me down there, and I'm listening to Sonny Stitt and enjoying it. And he got on the mic and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a young man who would like to come up and sit in with me." And my dad had sneaked the horn into the trunk of the car without me knowing it and went up and told Sonny Stitt I wanted to come up and sit in with him, which is not true. I hate to call my dad a liar, but that was not true. And so I went up and I played, and at this time I didn't know any music. I could read a little bit, but I'm all ears the way you need to be. That's the way you learn this music. That's what this music is, African, Eastern-based concept. He took me through all the keys on the blues. I didn't know one key from the other. So it didn't make me any difference. I didn't know C sharp from C, so I'm just here. I hear where he's going. I'm going where he's going. So, and at the end, when I left, when we were talking, he said, "Remember, young man, always breathe from your diaphragm." And for years, that's why I say Sonny Stitt gave me a hernia. Because looking for how to breathe from a diaphragm, I ended up with a hernia. But so the next time I found out Max was in town, so he took me to see Max. So now I had my horn because now I'm a little more brave because I had sat in with Sonny Stitt, So I said, well, yeah, I handled that pretty good, I was only 14. So I went up, and, I don't even know how my dad probably asked or something, because I know I was shy. I wouldn't have the nerve, So anyway, I went up and played with Max, and I know we played Cherokee. I know that because that's one of my songs. I mean, I started playing because of Charlie Parker, so I knew all of his stuff, I mean, I couldn't play his solo, but I heard the chord changes. I could hear them, I didn't know where the D flat went to, where it went in the bridge, but I could hear that. So, he was impressed. That's when I met Clifford Jordan, Julian Priester, and I think that might have just, I don't know whether they even had a piano player. And I don't remember who was on bass. It might have been the tall guy who, I can't think of his name.
Victor Sproles?
No, not Victor. Victor was with Art Blakey when I was there.
Okay.
No, I can't think of his name. But so he gave me his telephone number and said, because I said I'm coming to New York, He gave me his number and I called him and we got in touch. He invited me by the house. I would go by his house with him and Abby. Abby would cook dinner, some Sundays.
Central Park West?
Yep. Yeah. We played chess all day. Yeah. Yeah.
Max was an intellectual.
Oh, that he was responsible for me starting to study my history. My real history, what I should have learned in school, rather than wasting all this time learning somebody's version of a history. That's not a history.
Max, Mingus, and Sonny Rollins were the first jazz musicians to really address the issue of civil rights in their recordings. Songs like Freedom Now, Sweet, Mingus, Fables of Faubus, and Max as well, very outspoken.
Right, but they weren't the first. They weren't the first by any means. It's been addressed from time immemorial, but we couldn't say it like they did. They just came right out and said it. We had to do it in codes. Spirituals, all of these blueses, those things were still. Bird wrote "Now's the Time," Yeah, I mean, there are many songs that were addressing that, but they really came right out and said, "Doggone it," And Mingus is naming names, Faubus calling them out, I mean, that's really going. That's what. Gave me the idea for the Ntutu. I said, oh, music can be a catalyst for this,
Yeah.
Because I was ready to join the Black Panthers. That's where I was heading.
Well, the first jazz I heard was through Jazzmobile at my high school. One of the first situations where I got to be exposed to that music. And there was a certain spontaneity and energy and elegance to the music that really attracted me. I didn't understand it fully, but I just loved the sound and feeling of the music. And I thought to myself, that's what I want to do. I mean, I'd already been involved with playing musical instruments and studying music prior to that, but when I heard jazz, initially I just thought, yeah, this is a sound that resonates with me, something I'd like to really pursue.
Now, when you were a musician to begin with, you started to play jazz, you started to learn to improvise. Did you take to it immediately? Were you challenged by it? What was your initial reaction to try to learn how to play?
Yeah, I think certain musicians' brains are wired in a way where you have this keen interest and you're able to really discern between detail in the music and in a way where you can sort of absorb a lot of the information in the music and initially mimic it, but after you start to develop some level of vocabulary, you start putting the ideas together in a different sort of way. And that was something that I could spend hours doing, still is.
Well, that was a little more than 50 years ago, which is unbelievable, half a century.
Right.
Now you are involved in jazz education. You have been for a while. Could you draw a comparison between when you first learned where jazz education was at and what's happening, what you're doing now at USC?
Yeah. Well, this is an interesting phenomenon. I mean, I can't say I studied jazz in any sort of school setting. I mean, I picked it up by ear. I listened to recordings. I went, being around New York, went to hear live performances, and, through mimicry and just, absorbing information, developed some sense of vocabulary on my own. So, at that time, even, when I went to Hart College of Music, Jackie McLean had just arrived there, to Manhattan School of Music, Valerie and Bobby Capers were there. The jazz programs were minuscule by comparison to what's happening today. So, I studied classical music in university, and then on my own time, I listen to recordings, go out and play with people, go hear bands playing in clubs, and learn the music on my own. So this is a very different thing now. And honestly, I've been learning vicariously with the students. There's a different vocabulary involved here. I mean, the music is the same, but it's not the same scenario where, when I was their age, I played in bands. That's how I learned how to play. I got my ass kicked. I learned what to do, what not to do, from my elders. Whereas today, there's not that same level of on-the-job experience available. So, there's all the pedagogic considerations. And so that's what we do. These kids, they learn how to play together in school. They put bands together. We promote that to replace that scenario where they're getting to play, and learn. I mean, the big difference is there's not the Art Blakey or the, Elvin Jones or the, Buddy Rich or Thad Jones, Mel Lewis to mentor these kids quite the same way. There are some, certainly Wynton Marsalis is one, but there's not that same scenario where bands are working all the time and, you can really apprentice in a band and, get your act together.
Yeah. So when you got into the music, when I got into the music as well, we got into the history of it. We were into all the players from the past. We were listening to them. Is that true of today's students? Do they have the same interest in the past as we did?
It keeps sliding up, I would say. I think players of today, unless they are guided appropriately, they're listening to the trendy players of this current time, and perhaps maybe some of the people they listen to. So, I think part of my role as an educator is to hip these kids to, the early jazz performers, and how integral what they did, was just in the general chronology of, the music.
Yeah, absolutely. When alluding back to when you got into the music, you would sit in with people, and sometimes it didn't work out. Could you tell the story about the time you sat in with Rahsaan Roland Kirk?
Oh man, sure. I had this notion I could go sit in with Roland Kirk. I mean, there was this tradition at the Vanguard on Sundays, that last set, the band leader would typically let people sit in. So, I mean, I was 19, I knew nothing. And I got up my nerve. I went down there and asked Ruslan if I could sit in. I had this unusual instrument. It was a conophone. It was like a straight alto saxophone, but in the key of F. My saxophone teacher up at Hart had lent it to me, and I thought maybe that would be an interesting introduction to Ruslan. He was into playing these kind of obscure, unusual instruments. So I showed it to him, and then I, very coyly asked, could I maybe play a tune with you guys? And he said, yeah, because he said, yeah, to everybody. And there were some much older, experienced players sitting in that had every right to sit in. And I got up there, I was crapping in my pants. I was so nervous. And they played a blues, nice, easy blues. I thought, okay, I'm going to live through this. And I realize now it was sort of a ploy to, they smelled fresh blood, when I walked up there. It's like, who is this young white kid, man, And so the blues got me sort of comfortable. I thought, okay, cool. And then they counted off some way up, Limehouse Blues. And I didn't know the tune. And the head was over in about 8 seconds. And they shoved me up to the microphone. And the rest was not pretty. But it was a great lesson. It really let me know that I needed to work considerably harder and have a vocabulary and a repertoire and some sense of what I was doing before I went to try to sit in with anybody else.
Yeah, well, these kinds of lessons really never stop. And also the work to play this music never stops. I mean, we look at our friend Michael Brecker, who, by the way, today, the show that we're airing now would have been his 72nd birthday. He practiced all the time. Sonny
Yes.
Rollins, practicing all the time.
Right.
What is your regimen these days? How do you, when you're still working on it, what do you do? Do you practice? What do you do?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm an arranger and a composer, and that's a big part of what I do these days. I play the saxophone, I play the electronic wind instrument, occasionally play a flute or a clarinet, play some bass clarinet, but I'm not like somebody who's just strictly an instrumentalist. I mean, I have this other life. I'm the chief conductor of the WDR Big Band. When I'm involved in a project there, it's very labor intensive to do the arranging and writing. Frequently I have to write 10 big band arrangements. So that occupies a lot of my time. Plus I teach full time. So, I've made certain choices in terms of how I use my time based on the lifestyle I enjoy and, the things that are meaningful to me. Writing and teaching are two of them. Playing is the third. So those three really kind of have equal footing in my activities.
Yeah, I mean, your arrangements, you now with the WDR Big and your own groups, I mean, your big
And
band.
the Yellow Jackets.
And the Yellow Jackets. So let's go back to the early days. When did you first get into arranging and how did you learn it?
I learned it on the job, the way I learned everything else. So I was on the Buddy Rich band and had an opportunity to write. And I wrote, 5 or 6 pieces while I was there and got to play them every night and hear what worked and didn't work. I learned how to write for specific musicians for a specific band. I learned how to write myself into the picture as a player. And it was amazing. I mean, that was the era when you'd go out on the road and play every night. So there was a lot of opportunity to learn and grow.
Did Buddy ask you for the charts or did you just say, hey, Buddy, I'd like to write some charts?
He told me to write something. He didn't ask me. In his inimitable fashion, he said, write something. I was okay. Don't hurt me. But a parallel to that was, man, this sounds interesting. I mean, I have no idea what to do, but I'm certainly going to give it a shot. And I smelled a really great opportunity.
Was he happy with the work?
Absolutely. He kept saying, write more, write something else.
So that must have felt really good that a guy like Buddy Rich is encouraging you.
Yeah, it felt great. And I was so grateful to have had that opportunity. And and furthermore, it sort of got me thinking, so I'm writing for Buddy Rich. What does he want? What should I feed him that would make him feel good, that would really highlight what he does, So that was really interesting. It was an interesting exercise just in learning how to write for certain situations.
Well, you've written a lot of stuff on your own and you've arranged a lot of stuff. When you approach that today, first of all, what is the system that you have, the software? How do you write? Do you write by hand? Do you use software? Are the ideas in your head? Do you work against the deadline? What's your process?
All of that. I mean, initially I wrote by hand. I used pencil and score paper. And then when I discovered Sibelius, I found it was a little easier and faster to just go right into Sibelius. I used the piano for many years, and then at a certain point in time, I stopped using the piano because I was able to internalize what little I could do on the piano. It's in my head, and I found it a lot more expansive to just sit quietly and imagine sounds, and then kind of throw them in Sibelius, and then go in there and sort of refine and put everything together in a more musical way. I mean, for me, the bulk of my writing comes from the refinement. I'm full of ideas all the time. I mean, I'm thinking who I'm writing for. I'm thinking how to, construct a program with variety. Say I have to write 10 tunes for a CD, or I'm doing a project with WDR. And, I sort of start very broad and general and, come up with ideas. And in that mix also is doing a lot of listening to music, getting some inspiration. I hear a particular thing without necessarily copying that. I just think, wow, it'd be really interesting to do something in that vein and sort of take it, deconstruct whatever it is, and turn it into something else.
Yeah. Now, we've talked a little bit here about the musical side of what you do, but there's another side to it. That's the egos, the personalities, the business. From your perspective, in your career as a jazz musician, what's been the most challenging part of dealing with people in the business?
Well, I mean, I felt like I experienced an evolution. When I first started out, as most of us do, we're just thrilled to be playing. And I took every job that came along. I worked with a lot of band leaders, some of whom were really difficult to get along with. But I just, I was really looking at the opportunity musically. But I got to a certain juncture where I thought, I don't really need to work for guys that are a drag or, difficult. So at that point, I started seeking out musical situations where everybody got along and were reasonable people, and it was easier to be with them. And hence the Yellow Jackets situation came along in 1990. And that was a very comfortable, easy experience in terms of getting along, in a quartet setting. And the band, band's 40 years old. I've been there 30 years. Those are the kind of things I seek out. And in terms of my own projects, I've always sought out people that are like-minded, that, are not difficult, that, where there's a real collaborative effort that is easily facilitated. And the other thing, I think, as you age and, get a little more comfortable in your musicianship and personality, you just, you get to a point where this is what I do. Maybe you could use what I do. Maybe you can't use what I do. And this is what it is. And, I'm cool if you can use it. But if you can use it, let's see if we can find some general consensus where everyone is comfortable and on the same page.
Yeah. Well, closing out here, you've worked as a jazz musician in big bands and small groups. You've been an arranger. You've played with a master like Buddy Rich. You've done so much. What haven't you done that you still would like to do?
Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm sure there's things I would still like to do. I just want to keep going, and it seems like ideas of new projects come up either through collaboration with others, or somebody approaches me about doing something. I'm doing this documentary with you right now on anti-Semitism. I've never done anything quite like that, but here is a perfect opportunity where, we know each other. I'm comfortable working with you. It's a known entity. And I just, rather than think, I've never done this, I don't know how to do it, I'm thinking this is a great vehicle for trying something I've not done before, because it feels right. It feels comfortable,
Well, it feels great for me. And the music you've been doing is just perfect for the film. So
I'm glad you think so.
Happy to work with you, and our viewers. You'll be seeing this film. I don't know when. It's become my life's work here, but it's been an incredible journey.
Yeah, on that subject, this is great. Typically, I think with films, in general, there's always a deadline, and you're sort of harried and have to rush through and meet these deadlines. I love this. This is a lot more relaxed, and we can sort of take our time putting all this together. You can really survey, all the different possibilities. I can write a few different ideas for different, clips. I like this a lot, and I don't think it's always this way,
No, it's not. This is a unique situation. I'm producing this film organically.
Right.
It's been 2 years now. I mean, this is the most challenging project I've ever worked on, because of the subject matter and trying to figure out the best way to tell the story. And also, as I've gone through the process of making the film, I've had to learn a lot of things. I don't know about you, but sometimes you take a project on, geez, I'm not really strong on that. Let me go and
Right.
shed that. Let me learn about that. So,
Yeah.
it's been an education, and it's been a fantastic experience. Thank you so much, Bob.
Hey, Brett, I'd like to say one more thing before we end, which is kudos to you, Bret Premack, for presenting this music in your inimitable fashion to the world, via your Jazz Video Guy site. You've done a huge service to the arts community, to jazz music. You've really given everybody a window into the world of what many of the important artists in the music do, and myself included. I'll be forever grateful for, the projects I've done that you've documented. It adds such a great dimension when people can get behind the scenes and actually see a little bit about what goes into the making of this music, what the other musicians, impressions of the project are, and so on. It's just been great, and I so appreciate what you're doing.
Yeah, and we certainly appreciate Bob Mintzer. Bob is a fantastic musician, wonderful person, and same thing with Gary Bartz. I am very lucky to have worked with these people and know these people, and the journey continues. If you got any questions for me, ask them now. I'm about to sign off here, but I'll tell you that I will be back on Friday. My guest will be Bill Goodwin, who's a great drummer, best known for his work with Phil Woods. He played with Gary Burton. I mean, he's been around the jazz scene. He knew Lenny Bruce, one of my idols. So he'll be here on Friday. Week after that, the great drummer Louis Nash is going to be joining me. Louis has played on many, many recordings with many, many great musicians, from Horace Silver to Tommy Flanagan. He's teaching now, and wonderful person, great drummer. Coming up, not on the list yet, but Steve Gadd, another drummer of some renown, will also be joining me in a few weeks. And don't tell anyone, it's a little secret, but Ron Carter is going to be a big guest with Jazz Video Guy Live. So I continue to do this. I've been a jazz listener. Jazz has been the soundtrack to my life since I was 10 years old. I was lucky to go to New York NYU Film School, get to know these musicians, become a filmmaker, and do this eventually when the opportunity came. And I have no intention of stopping. It's fun to do. I love to hang out. The Jazz Video Guy Live thing started last year at the beginning of the pandemic. I was like, what day is it? What time is it? I had done some work with online streaming. Decided to do the show. I got hooked up with some software, Ecamm Live. And when I started, I was doing